I decided to sponsor a bill that excludes the death penalty for individuals that are severely mentally ill, because I understood as a physician that severe mental illness is a biological, pathological disease of the brain like any other medical illness.
Persons with severe mental illness don't have the true rational ability to form the decision-making that a person without the mental illness has. So by setting out in the law that a person with severe mental illness is not subject to the death penalty, you can still have responsibility for the crime, you can still have life without parole, but you don't give them that penalty that's reserved for the worst of the worst.
With severe mental illness, their ability to think things through, control their impulses, weigh their options when they're deciding what course of action to take is impaired. I think as a society, we can't put people with severe mental illness to suffer the ultimate punishment.
We ought not to put to death people who are not as able to control themselves and their behavior because they've got a severe mental illness. It's just not right.
If someone has a diagnosable mental illness, whether treatment has been successful or unsuccessful, they should be excluded from the death penalty.
The Supreme Court ruled a number of years ago that people who have intellectual disabilities, and they called it mental retardation at the time, could not be put to death because they didn't understand what they did was wrong because of their disability. Likewise, several years later, the Supreme Court ruled that juveniles under the age of 18 and even children could not be put to death because of their youth and inexperience and immaturity, couldn't understand what they did. And the people, the individuals with severe mental illness really are in that same category. So they should not be put to death for the same reasons.
Regarding the insanity plea, so hard to show. You've got to show that you didn't understand the wrongfulness of your actions. It's a high bar to meet. It is rarely used, and even more rarely is it successful. In the 1% of cases where it's raised, 25% of those cases is successful. Not guilty by reason of insanity is not going to keep people with severe mental illnesses from being executed.
In the penalty phase, jurors more often than not and prosecutors turn the mitigation of mental illness into an aggravating factor. Instead of looking at the fact that their mental illness was behind what they did, they created into something that they should punish them worse for. It just is not effective in the mitigation phase because of how it's used by prosecutors and how it's perceived by juries.
The jury winds up thinking they're even more dangerous because this is somebody who can't control themselves because of their mental illness. Let's solve that by executing them. Put on evidence of mental illness. It could backfire and make the jury more likely to want to see you executed. With regard to competency to stand trial, the question there is whether you understand the criminal proceedings and can assist in the preparation of the defense. That is a very low standard. And competency to stand trial doesn't answer the question of were you impaired at the time of the offense because of mental illness. The competency to be executed, the question there is, do you know why you're being executed? So that's not going to apply in a lot of circumstances. And that also doesn't answer the question of, were you mentally ill at the time of the crime? You could be severely mentally ill and not delusional about why you're being executed, and you will be executed.
I was diagnosed some years ago with bipolar disorder. It's been a challenge. You know, there's a lot of folks out there like me that are living with a mental health condition.
Often people think that individuals with mental illness are violent. That's not true. People with mental illness are far more likely to be victimized than they are to victimize other people. People think sometimes that they're faking, that they are looking for sympathy from other people, they don't want to work, that they don't want to contribute to society.
We all know people who have some degree of mental illness, but do we all know somebody who's been schizophrenic? Do we all know someone who is delusional? Maybe not, right? And so not having that experience, that life experience, allows jurors and other people in the community to otherize people with severe mental illness.
It's with great sorrow that I announce the death of Corporal Eric E. Sutphin of Montgomery County Sheriff's Office.
My dad was killed when I was 9 years old. I remember the day entirely. We were just told that an inmate escaped from jail and that he killed my father on the Huckleberry Trail, which is somewhere we would go frequently. My dad loved to bike, so we would bike there all the time.
Deputy Sutphin has been very diligent in the efforts to apprehend William Morva, the suspect from the hospital shooting yesterday. This morning at approximately 7 a.m., Deputy Sutphin encountered Morva and was fatally shot.
Little girls always look up to their dad. I remember that one of the first words I learned how to spell was sheriff, because he would point out each letter on his car. And for me, it was, he went out each day knowing that he might not come back. He was shot for the first time when I was in kindergarten, so I was aware that it could happen again. But I always thought, like, oh, he survived the first time, he should survive again. However, I remember it was very much put into us that we had to say, I love you at the end of every conversation, because you did not know. Most of the details were hidden from us, and I chose to look into it more when I was older. I was curious about what was going on in this trial and what exactly happened that day. Mr. Morva was hiding on the side of the trail. It is thought that my father did not even see him. His gun was still holstered. I suspected that William Morva had some mental illness early on, and I wonder also the time in solitude confinement, if that did not make it worse, since the prison did not grant him any treatment. Later, I saw a few videos. The videos are hard for me because of his face. He seems so full of anger and fear. It is hard to see that in person. I never had anger towards William Morva. I understood that he was scared. I've seen the jail and I understand why he would want to escape. I think largely I felt fear. I was afraid if he killed my father, what would stop him from killing me? I lost that fear of him because I saw him as a person.
Severe mental illnesses are medical, pathological conditions of the brain. They're just like any other disease, like heart disease or diabetes or thyroid disease or cancer. It's not something that a person necessarily has any control over.
When a person has a disruption in their thinking or their emotions, as thinking and emotional beings, that affects their ability to function in society. What makes a mental illness severe is the level at which that illness at that point in time is interfering with their daily functioning.
And what people don't really understand is mental illness can flare up at any time and any moment, and sometimes people that are struggling are not able to make the rational decisions that they really need to make in their life.
So many people of all strata of society has had serious mental illnesses. This could happen to anyone. This could be our children, this could be our nephews, it could be our cousins. And when this happens, these people really don't have any control over their impulses, and they're unable to distinguish between fantasy and reality. And when they commit a very serious crime, they may need to be punished if they don't reach the standard of insanity, but they don't deserve the death penalty either.
A man convicted of killing a Montgomery County Sheriff's corporal and a hospital security guard is now set to be executed. Judge today granted Attorney General Mark Herring's request to set William Morva's execution for July 6th. This follows the U.S. Supreme Court's refusal to hear his final appeal. Morva was in jail in the summer of 2006.
Governor McAuliffe issued a statement this afternoon saying he will not spare William Morva's life. This comes after growing requests for clemency from his attorneys, advocacy groups, and even one of the victim's daughters. Many people argue Morva had a severe mental illness when the murders happened back in 2006.
It's the hardest part of my job. I didn't sleep a wink last night thinking about this. Is a very, very, very tough decision. As governor, I got to enforce the law. I want to be consistent in every one of these that I have looked at to make sure I'm doing the exact same thing I did before, enforcing the law.
In accordance with the order from the Circuit Court of Montgomery County, Virginia, the execution of William Charles Morva has been carried out in the manner prescribed by the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia. Death was pronounced at 9:15 p.m. When asked whether he had any last words, Mr. Morva responded, no.
When I think about William's execution, that day was very difficult. On the one hand, I was somewhat relieved that he's not having to suffer without treatment anymore, but at the same time, the whole point was that he would get treatment if he could be evaluated properly and have a trial again. I am glad he's not suffering, but I do miss him, and I feel like, though what he did was very serious, I do feel that the system really failed William and his family. I can't imagine anyone going through knowing the day and the minute that you were gonna die. I certainly can't imagine what he went through for years in solitary confinement, just getting, his mind getting worse and worse.
He was shaking. He started gasping for air. His stomach came out and then contracted pretty dramatically.
The execution of William Morva provided me with no solace. Instead, I saw it as another person dead. I was upset that the government wouldn't even reach out and speak to me to hear my point of view. And instead, they just went ahead with his execution. It was my dad. Shouldn't I have the choice?
And happening today, an activist group will push Indiana lawmakers to make exemptions for criminals that have serious mental illness. The goal is to spare mentally ill people from the death penalty. The proposed legislation will be filed today, and it aims to protect people with conditions like depression, PTSD, and traumatic brain injuries from the death penalty.
I think the reason why we have a growing bipartisan movement to eliminate the death penalty for people with severe mental illness, it's because it's the right thing not to take someone's life for committing a crime when that person at the time of that crime was significantly impaired by severe mental illness.
Do we as a society want to spend our money pushing people through the legal system and putting them to death, or spend that money on treatment, research, trying to figure out how to better care for our vulnerable individuals, help people earlier, and even put that money towards helping families and helping victims?
The American Bar Association showed that Tennessee has spent between $57 and $75 million since 1977 on the death penalty for seriously mentally ill people. And before we start on a very long, drawn-out process, let's say we're not going to put people to death that don't have the wherewithal to understand what they've done.
We need to set these standards so that persons with serious mental illness aren't subject even to the death penalty. Take it off the books, just like you took off juveniles and persons with intellectual disabilities.
I think this whole experience was a real eye-opener for me, just the way our system works, the way it doesn't work. To get so much public support and so much of an outcry from around the world against his execution, and for us still just to say, well, that original trial, from what I've seen, covered him, like, this original trial didn't get into William's mental health.
I believe by having a severe mental illness exemption for the death penalty, that families of the victims, of people like me, we would be able to have more support. My mother suddenly became a single mother of 2 twin girls. There was no child support either. And I would have appreciated more from the state instead of them killing a man and then thinking, oh, that'll make everything okay for my family. I think so many people believe that just because my dad was killed, that means I want to kill William Morva too. I believe just having my presence, speaking out and telling people that not all victim family members want the death penalty is important. I might not have been able to save William Morva, but maybe I can save someone else. And then his death will have meant something. And that's what I hope for.